Right, before I start this film, a couple of little reminders. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers before the end of October. If we do that, then I'm going to do something mental that I think you'll really, really like. Also, there's a composer walk up here in Edinburgh on the 14th of October. I've still got to provide exact details and maybe a little signy-iny thing so that we can work out how many people are going to come. So do subscribe to this channel for those two reasons. Hi there, my name's Christian Henson. A few years ago I made a video for the Spitfire Audio channel. It was on, I think, Santa Monica Beach, where I told an anecdote about how I had a nervous breakdown, basically burst into tears. It was proper tears and snot all over the keyboard. The fear of creating my own orchestral music for the first time. And what I realised when I overcame that was it was fear itself that was preventing me from doing so. So to continue in the spirit of that video, I want to take it a step further. I hope with my work with Spitfire Audio, I've proven to many of you that orchestral music isn't beyond our grasp, regardless of our abilities theoretically or our ability to write music. And that doesn't change when you're working with live musicians. So in the spirit of that video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with this very simple string part that's very poorly programmed and get a bunch of 24 amazing string players to play it from the Scottish Session Orchestra in collaboration with Clockwork Sessions. We know that we can make orchestral music in the box because DAWs allow us to in these amazing sample libraries, whether you buy them or get them for free. And in order to get a band of maybe 24 players or a quartet or just a single flautist to play your music, you don't need to employ orchestrators, arrangers, copyists. You can do this yourself, even if you can't read music. And that is because, yes, our DAW allow us to imagine and create these wonderful orchestral worlds, but they also enable us to spit out this stuff. So let's have a listen to this piece, and you'll see that I haven't even bothered to do any expression programming during the middle, because I'm going to get the orchestra to replace everything. Nothing really to write home about. I'm going to show you how an orchestra with absolutely no instructions other than the notes and the rests can absolutely transform this piece of music. Unfortunately, if I was to give them this, they would go, huh? This is, as a friend of mine once told me, just a pile of bat poo. So we need to organise it a bit better. Now, the theoretical knowledge I'm going to assume you know is that you understand what the difference between a note and a rest and a clef and a time signature is. However, I'm working on this Blaggers guide. This whole bit up here explains the theory of notation before we start getting into some ideas of the different clefs, how accidentals work, dynamics, and how to phrase it, and some basic instructions. This is basically everything that I've picked up over the last 25 years, distilled down into a sheet that I'm really hoping that you'll help me get kind of even richer in content. More about that later. So what's the first step? Well, you'll see that I'm a bit of a sustain pedal hound. So I'm actually going to just, in the global format, this isn't a Logic tutorial, so I'm not going to be honing in on what hotkeys I'm using and all that kind of stuff. Whatever DAW, provided it has a notation function, this tutorial will help you with that one too. Okay, so that's rid of the pedals. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate these so that I can always just go back a step. Now, one of the problems is you can see I've played it live and I'm anticipating the beat, which is what you kind of have to do with string samples. But what then happens with that is you get all of these really weird rhythms. The Logic interprets it a little bit too verbatim. So let's snap it to the grid, and I'm going to do that just with a simple 8-note quantize. And you'll see every step of the way, it'll start making things just look a little bit more legible. Now, this is basically in a piano stave. So the treble clef is your right hand, is your higher clef. Your bass clef is, as it suggests, a lower clef is your left hand. Now, what we need to do is organise that into basically single parts for each instrument. When composing this piece of music, I had in mind who I was writing it for, and that's a string section, which means 5 voices. First violins, second violins, violas, cellos and basses. Now, you can have more voices if you want, but you need to then split off some of the sections. So half of the section plays one note and half of the section plays another, which basically means it can sound a little bit thinner, less of a section. So what I've been wary of is not using more than 5 voices at a time for this string section, because it's only 24 players. I mean, a symphony-sized string section is about 60. So I don't want them suddenly becoming smaller and smaller subdivisions, if you know what I mean, because they're going to replace all of the samples. So what we need to then do is voice it. And this is the part that really scares people, but it's very, very simple. First violins take the top note, second violins take the next note down, violas, the next note usually kind of in the middle, cellos, the next note down from that, and basses, the very bottom note. So you simply have to organise it by stacking one note on top of another by section. They never cross over, and if they do, they'll usually raise their hands to say, I'm going above the first violins at this point. So how do I go about doing that? Well, let's create the 5 sections, the 5 voices. So we got first violin, second violin, or violins section, VA, which stands for viola, VC, which is the full name of the cello, which is the violoncello or violoncello, then CB, which is contrabass, which is the full name for basses. They don't mind being called basses, though. And I'm just going to copy that part across all of them. Let's mute that. And it's as simple as this. What I'm going to do is get the first violins just to take all the top notes. So let's just delete all of the notes underneath the top notes. And that's the violin part voiced. And then what we do is we delete the very top note and then do exactly the same process as we did before, deleting all of the notes underneath the new top note, which is the second violin part. Now, where the ranges of the instruments are concerned, if you actually, instead of using an ensemble patch, I'm actually not going to have the cellos coming in at first. They're going to join in there, and then the basses will join in there. Where ranges are concerned, if you switch your parts, these individual parts, to actually the individual sections, so not ensemble patches, you'll get an indication from the sampler when you've gone out of the range. I've also, on the cheat sheet, started working on the ranges as well, both by MIDI value and by notation, alongside the tunings of each individual string. That's the cellos done, and finally the bass, which is everything except for the bottom note, and I don't want them coming in until here. And there's your piece voiced. And now if we have a look at that, so we need to format each individual voice or section. So we're going to go from piano to violin, or just the treble clef. Same for the second violin, and let's change it from violin to viola. This is a kind of weird clef where middle C is in the middle, so it's in between the treble and the bass clef. If we go cello there, it uses the bass clef, and then the contrabass uses the bass clef, but if we go to contrabass, you'll see has a little 8 beneath the bass clef, and it basically means that these exact notes as they're written in the bass clef, but they sound an octave lower. So you'll see suddenly we've got something that to me resembles music. However, there are some anomalies. If we have a listen to this bit here, you'll see this denotes a rest. Now, do I want it to rest? Well, it certainly doesn't sound like it. Again, because I'm a sustain pedal hound, what I need to do is a thing in Logic called force legato, which is just basically make all the notes nudge up against each other so there's no gaps. And this way, Logic will interpret it better so it'll look even simpler. And this becomes the composer score or the conductor score, where you can see what each individual instrument is playing at one glance. But what you need to then do is separate it off into individual parts. And I'd give it a little tidy so that, for example, the bar lines aren't crashing into the staves, that kind of stuff. So let's return to the score, and you will hear that without any indication of dynamics, of phrase markings, any instructions, they will interpret the piece of music wholly human, wholly musical. And I think you'll be surprised at how, by just literally tidying up your parts and spitting them out as music, how musical it actually is. But this is just the first of 4 takes. I'm going to take each take on a step to get even more nuance and dynamic out of them. So let's have a listen to what this sounds like. So what you'll spot here is a copying error. There's actually this octave part that is all joined up, and there's a gap there. And you can hear that the band, probably in rehearsal, recognised that there was this flowing octave line and we were probably missing a note. They're familiar with copy errors. They're not the end of the world. You can usually work out what's wrong on the day. So we listen to this bar here. I'm going to take it from bar 18. You'll hear that the band is going da 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 da. Excuse my singing. But what you can actually do is ask them to phrase it differently. Imagine if instead of da 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 da, they sang da ya da ya da ya da ya da ya. Well, they do that by bowing less. So currently what they're playing is da 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 da, and that is the implication with the notation. You're basically giving them no phrase marks between each note, so they assume you need one bow per note. But da ya da ya da ya da ya, it's kind of like joined up writing, but instead of every word joined up, it's every other letter is joined up. And how do you notate that? Well, if you look at these marks here, Logic has already put a phrase mark in. And what that means is simply don't rebow. This is basically one note, the same note. And the reason why it's put what's called a tie across is because it goes across the bar or measure. So you can use exactly this mark to do the joined up bits that we were talking about. So if we go in here and get our pencil out, the first violins would now play da ya da ya da ya da ya da ya. I'd match that phrase marking for the lower violins as well. So instead of da 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 da, they're going da ya da ya da ya da ya da ya, or rather bowing in twos. So when these lines between the same note, they're a tie. When they're between different notes, they're a slur. And you can get wind and brass players to play slurred as well. So with a wind instrument or a brass instrument, you tongue each note, ta 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 ta, or pa 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 pa, ta ya ta ya ta ya ta ya ta ya, or boya 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 for your brass. But you don't have to slur it in twos, you can slur it in fours. So da ya da ya da ya 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 da ya. But I prefer twos, so I'll stick with those. The opposite of joining up is making little gaps between each note. So you'll hear on this part da 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 da. What if we want them to go da da da
da. Now, we could make them shorter notes and add rests, but a quicker way of doing this is to add a staccato mark here and maybe for the part below. And that indicates that you want very, very short notes. And using instructions, which are words, you can describe how long or short. But a staccato will be like dun, 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 dun. So not massively short, but definitely a little bit of daylight between each note. The next thing I want to talk about before we listen to the next take is that I've not given them any instruction of how loud or quiet I want this to be played. And it's not just about setting a level for the entire piece. You can actually vary the dynamic. And this is where orchestras are really come into their own, this huge sense of not only light and shade, but loud and large and small and tender. And if you look on the cheat sheet, there's a whole list of dynamic markings. Now, when a musician's just handed a bit of music without any dynamic markings, more times than not, they'll play at mezzo forte, which is the kind of medium level. But you've got forte, loud, fortissimo, and fortissimo. And in the other direction, mezzo piano, piano, pianissimo, and pianissimo. And you can go quieter than that, and you can go louder than that, but I just didn't want to cram too much information on this. So let's have a look at how I phrased up the next take. So you see, we start every note with piano, but we don't have to write it under every note. They know I'll play at this level until otherwise instructed, i.e. mezzo forte, a little bit louder here. And then we've instructed the cello who's coming in here to play at mezzo forte too. And you'll see that I've phrased everything up, mainly bowing in twos. So I hope you agree there's almost a more lyrical quality to it. A couple of interesting areas. This high note up here is at the wrong dynamic. It needs to be a lot quieter. I wasn't there on the day, but if I had been, I would have gone to the first violins between bars 9 to 16 inclusive, so they know it includes the whole of the contents of bar 16, play down a dynamic, which would mean they play mezzo piano, or specify piano, or just say P or PP or MP. The other thing that I thought worked really well was the staccato, because it really made the cello sing out. This felt more like an accompaniment as opposed to part of the kind of the voicing of the piece, if you know what I mean. I've not used the correct language there, but let's just have a listen to that. I guess it's because there's more daylight in the arrangement at that point. Now, if we go back to the dynamics on my cheat sheet, you'll notice at the bottom, there's these lines here. This is a crescendo, so this is a line opening. And what that suggests is between these notes and this note, we want you to gradually increase in volume. Diminuendo is the other way around, forte to piano, so gradually decrease in volume. And you'll see that on this chart, we don't have any of those markings. What you'll hear from this section into this is a big leap that, again, just isn't as lyrical. Almost feels like an edit. So what I'm going to do in the next one is to be just a little bit more lyrical with the dynamics, but also introduce things called instructions that, again, really steers your players into the way in which they interpret the music. So you'll see that we now have these markings here. So what we're doing is we're at the end of our piano section, we're actually building, anticipating that we're going into mezzo forte. And the same at the end here, just as I demonstrated. So we'll actually get increasing in volume between the piano section and the forte section. But also we've got a lot more words. So dolce, I believe, means kind of tender and beautiful. It's affectionate, really, I believe. Then we're going into artificial harmonics. Now, if you're a guitarist, you'll know that you can produce artificial harmonics by fingering a note and then putting your little finger or another finger, I think it's about four frets above, and just resting it on the same note. Then produce a harmonic, which is roughly it sounds kind of 2 octaves above the note that you're fingering. Well, exactly the same thing applies with violins. They can produce harmonics in the same way, and cellos and basses. They're not the easiest thing to produce, so I wouldn't do incredibly complex passages with harmonics. You'll also see I've got this thing called pizz, which stands for pizzicato, which means to pluck the note. They can do this with the bow in the hand, with a spare finger, but it's quite difficult to adjust between one technique and the other. So what you'll see I've done here is actually chopped off the last note of that section so they can move comfortably back to their bows, which is signalled by the word arco, if you imagine kind of a bow and arrow, an arc. Also with the word normal, the first violins will know to stop playing artificial harmonics. There's a way of actually writing these with a little diamond sign, but I couldn't find that in Logic, so just give them a straight instruction. Esprit, that means espressivo, which usually is interpreted as more intensity. So they'll usually warm the sound up, and by that they'll play with more vibrato, and that'll give it more kind of expression. Then you'll see we're going in this piano section to sul tasto, which is one of my favourite techniques. It's where they play, or bow rather, further up the fingerboard. And this actually produces less tone and more of the rasp of the bow stroking the strings. I remember once really wanting to make a moment very tender, and the first violinist said, well, maybe should we try it sul tasto? And what's that? And he explained it to me, and the minute he played it was like, yeah. And then to take it a step further, you can instruct flautando, which is the same position as sul tasto, but it's kind of using half the bow. You'll also see that I've accompanied that instruction with poco vib. So vib means vibrato, poco means a little. You can also say senza, no vibrato, or molto vibrato, or just vibrato. And then it says moving to sul pont. So basically, you can imagine during this crescendo, they're going sul pont, which basically means going in the other direction of sul tasto, which is towards the bridge. And the further they get towards the bridge, it produces quite a kind of ugly metallic sound. Other than that, I've also added some glissandi. This is to slide between the notes. And you'll see here, what's unusual is I've slurred the same 2 notes in the same bar, making it a tie. So what's that all about? Well, this gives an indication of where I want the gliss to begin. If we start there, it'll go dum, but here it's dum. So I think that'll be interesting to listen out for. So right at the end, normal, molto espressivo. So triple F, gradually building. You'll hear, I believe that it's more intense by, well, obviously you're going really bloody loud at the end, but also just by growing, it's kind of getting and building and building and building in passion. So let's have a listen to that. So just to point out this sul pont technique. right at the end there's when they're right up close to the bridge and the note actually starts breaking up. I'm not sure I like it a huge amount. Again, I wasn't there on the day. So at this point, it's simply about collaborating with the musicians and going, naming the bar numbers between, say, listen, cut the sol pont instruction for that bit, and experimentation. Something that I will often do when watching the film that I'm scoring is ask them to play with mutes. This will usually mean that the piece isn't quite hitting the tender or emotional element, and adding mutes, which are these little rubber things that attach to the strings, basically mutes the amount of resonance that the strings have to create a softer, slightly quieter. It's like, you imagine it's kind of like them going down half a dynamic. So often you may say, I want you to play with mutes, but play everything up a dynamic so it stays at the same volume. But it produces this very soft sound. Now, something I have to warn you about is with smaller bands like this one, it can create a slight thinness to the sound that actually isn't particularly attractive, particularly when you go down to maybe a quartet. But I've done a take with mutes on, so you can really compare the difference. So I don't know about you, but I think in the quiet passages, it just sounds absolutely beautiful. But here, instead of going la 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 la, it's kind of going woo, 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 woo. So getting them to take the mutes on and off, I would get them to basically punch in takes. Otherwise, you have to leave big chunks of space so the different sections can take them on or off, and it is a noisy business. But what you can also do is just take one take without sword and one with, and simply comp it like you would a singer. The thing that musicians love doing more than anything else is collaborating and being part and involved in the process. So don't be frightened to experiment, just like you would a guitarist or a singer. One technique I may have adopted would be to say, listen, can we split the sections in half? Half of you have your mutes on, half of you have them off. Trying all sorts of crazy stuff like that. And if you don't know the Italian term, you can just go, I want it to sound like more or meh, etc., etc. So don't be scared to collaborate. And the only thing I would say is always treat musicians with respect, thank them for each take, say that was wonderful, but don't be scared to do it again if they didn't quite nail it. And if there's a part where the intonation, i.e. the tuning, is always out, it's absolutely normal to say, listen, we keep on hearing a kind of an intonation issue in bars 17 to 18, and they will amongst themselves work out a way of better fingering it, or possibly make some suggestions to can we drop in here to make that the better performance that you want. They're so used to working with modern technology, and they never want to be seen to be giving a bad performance. Often you'll be happy with the take and they'll go, listen, can we just do one more? We think we can do it better, for example. So thanks so much to the Scottish Session Orchestra and Clockwork Sessions for organising this. As I said, it cost me just a few £100. So you might want to think about spending less on that next expensive Spitfire library and actually get yourself on the ladder to working with musicians. It takes practice like everything else, and working up that rapport and learning the things that you learn from musicians is a really valuable part of your journey, and one I'd urge you to get on as soon as humanly possible. So check out the Clockwork Session links down below and join their mailing list, and they'll let you know when they do these amazing shared sessions. Wherever you are in the world, you can dial in remotely and help produce the session, or they'll just produce it for you in your absence. But it doesn't just have to be remote sessions. It could be a flute player that you know down at the pub, or your mate the cellist, and even with just a single solo cello or violin under that terribly programmed stuff that I played you earlier, it would really elevate it. Okay, right, I'll get off my soapbox. If you hit the links down below, you'll get a study pack full of the different takes that I've done, so you can really A/B the difference, PDFs, MIDI, Logic files for if you use Logic, etc., etc., and a link to my Blaggers guide. And if you go there, and I'm definitely have made mistakes, I've made any mistakes, or indeed you'd like to suggest some great examples of these instruments playing wonderful repertoire, then just click on the comments section and I will work with you to create a resource that really suits the needs of all of us blaggers. Thanks, as always, for watching to the end. A reminder that I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers by the end of October. So if you haven't subscribed yet, it's going to be really worth your while. Ding that bell as well. I really advise that. One of those for the Scottish Session Orchestra and Clockwork Sessions. And just get on that blower to a musician and see how much they can elevate your music. Best of luck with it. See you next time.